And I was digging in my backpack to get my keys. And all of a sudden, somebody comes up behind me, shoves me into this van.
You are Becky Erkkila, and here's your book. Anybody who's watching the podcast right now, this is Becky's book, What Shall I Do? In this book, you talk about one of the most horrific experiences that I think anybody can go through in this life. And my uncle is familiar with it. It has a lot of notoriety to it. There's a lot of people in this community that are aware of it. But let's just start at the beginning. Will you kind of just take us on this journey?
Okay. So I always like to start growing up, because I think a lot of people think if you grow up in an abusive home, then maybe you're more likely to get an abusive relationship. But my home growing up was loving and kind, and so I don't feel like I necessarily learned it from there as far as being treated with disrespect and being controlled and stuff. But I did get into my first marriage, and that's where I felt like I started to get the low self-esteem. My first husband was very verbally abusive, sexually abusive. Then you start to doubt who you are and if you're worth being treated with respect.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed in that relationship for 8 years. When I realized it wasn't going to get better, I left it. And at that time I had 4 kids. And I remember my dad saying, if anybody is willing to take you and your 4 kids, then you should do that. And so I met a man that I had actually previously known.
So you took that to heart.
I did.
When he said that, it was just terrible advice. And as dad, I've given some terrible advice as a dad as well, but this one had really tragic consequences. But you took that to heart. And I think this is important because, and I want to interject for just a second. I read a book just recently I'd highly recommend anybody read called Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters, and how important the relationship is between a daughter and her father, and how that relationship often is the most important relationship a daughter will ever have until she gets into a healthy marriage. Did you feel that way with your dad?
Yes, and actually I feel like that determines their relationship with other men. If they have that connection with their dad, then they feel loved and they feel all their needs are being met, and they don't have to go do crazy things to get attention from other guys. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And they're more confident in themselves, and then they attract a guy that will respect them and love them. But if their dad was kind of missing or didn't treat them very good, then that totally affects a woman and her ability to have a good relationship with a guy. But yes, I definitely took that to heart as far as my dad said 2 things to me that I definitely took to heart. The first one was good. He says about my first husband, he's like, okay, it wasn't wise that you married him the first time. He didn't want me to marry my first husband. But if you go do it again, then shame on you. Shame on me the first time, shame on, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, even though my first husband tried to get back with me a couple of times. So, and then the second thing he said is, whoever will take you and your 4 kids, you should just go with that. So I met my second husband. And I really was not attracted to him. I felt like he was arrogant and thought he knew everything. And just not my type, I would say. But because he was willing to take me and my kids, I guess, and he was so persistent, talking about the red flags of abuse, like asked me to marry him 10 times, just kept asking me and pushing me. And I wasn't in a good place. I hadn't taken the time. I mean, I got divorced in August and met him, reconnected with him in, I think it was December. And we were married by February. I mean, did not take time at all to heal or remember who I was.
Especially after being married for 8 years in a toxic relationship that long. You need some time. You need some runway to figure out who you are and recover and start to heal.
Well, and even if I had gone to school or done something, because I felt like the other thing that pushed me was the finance part, because I didn't know how I was going to afford and take care of my
Mhm.
kids. You know what I mean? I
Mhm.
didn't have any. I was a seamstress and I did sew out of my home, but it wasn't enough to support a family. And my sister and her friend moved in and helped me with rent for a little bit, but that was a short term thing, you know?
Yeah.
So in my mind, I was like, oh, I got to hurry and fix this problem. But interesting enough, it was the finance part that had me get out of that second marriage. Like he did not support us. He got in and out of jobs and was always getting fired, and it was always somebody else's fault.
Mhm.
You know, so typical, you know, that power and control will and all the different things they talk about. He so met all those. I bet you 90% of the red flags they talk about, I should have seen and didn't. So anyway, I get into the second marriage I remember getting back from our honeymoon, like either the day or the day after we got back from our honeymoon, he got served with a charge that he'd been violent in front of a child. And so this should have been, here's another red flag.
Mhm.
And I just remember, first of all, I felt like such a failure because I'd already been divorced. And, you know, even though when you're healthy, you can look back and say, well, I did everything I could.
Yeah.
He chose something different. But
There's still a sense that you're branded with like a scarlet letter, especially in our communities. Divorce is something that is a stigma that it's hard not to feel like you failed. At least that's how I felt when I went through my divorce.
oh,
I felt like a complete failure. I felt like I was a second class citizen in the community in a lot of ways. Um, I was horrified for my kids, you know, what legacy I was leaving behind for them. I went through a faith crisis, an identity crisis. Um, it was a really, really rough stretch. So yeah, I can understand that.
yeah, so I felt like a failure. So then I started rationalizing, justifying, like it's better,
Hmm.
even if this marriage isn't the greatest, it's better if I at least give it a go and try to make it work. Um, but honestly, I mean, I can look back and there was some good times. So I have 4 kids. He brings 2 kids into the marriage. So now there's 6 kids involved. Um, and he, for the most part, it wasn't physically abusive at the beginning. It was more control. Like he
Mhm.
would throw things or maybe punch the wall or, you know, just do things to show his power and his, you know, if you don't do exactly what I say, then there'll be consequences. I remember he had this look like this very, I don't even know how to describe it, but all the kids and we would just run around and do whatever it is. Like looking back, I think, okay, here's 7 of us running around trying to please him,
Hmm.
try to make sure he's not mad or he doesn't get escalated or how
Yeah.
ridiculous is that? You know?
Going around on eggshells in the
Yes.
house. Yeah.
Yeah. And when things would get really bad, I would, or, you know, when I felt the tension rising and knew that probably he was going to throw something or yell or whatever, I would tell the kids to go downstairs, trying to protect him. Um, and then he would have his, whatever, get out his anchor. And whatever it was always either my fault or one of the kids' fault. I don't remember him ever taking responsibility for getting mad or throwing things or anything like that. And then he started, I mean, as the marriage got on, financially, we never were really making it. He wasn't even making enough to support our family, let alone, you know, of course, he needed to pay child support for the kids that he had. And I got to the point I couldn't handle that anymore. I couldn't handle not being able to financially take care of ourselves. And I worked as much as I could. I even went out and worked outside the home at times, at night. And it was during those times I wish I would have seen the thing I regret most about the whole marriage is the abuse that my kids went through. And I wish I would have seen. I feel like we put our head, you know, I don't know if you feel like you did this. You put your head in the sand. You don't really want to see what's going on. You really don't want to see the effect that it's having on you or your kids. You're just so worried about making the marriage work and keeping it together because of, you know, like you said, the community or your church or whatever, where you
Mhm.
feel like, no, you have to make this work. no matter how bad it is, you have to make it work. And so my
And
kid,
there is a problem. I think I view it as a problem with the way marriage is handled in the church that you and I are both members of, where there's not an easy way to fix it if you're in a type of relationship like that, because there's so much morality cemented on it now. It's like you made this decision and this commitment, and now God wants you to make this work. And I'm for sure a proponent of working through your problems in your marriage, but it there's not really any clear way to like recognize when you're in a relationship in that type of setting that allows you to kind of think outside of I have to make it work. So you're just like, my moral obligation is to just figure out how to make this work, whatever the cost in a lot of ways. And it's really, really unhealthy in my opinion.
oh, I agree. In fact, I look back, I had 3 different leaders, and 2 had the same take. One I felt like was kind of judgmental, only saw what he wanted to see and didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Another one was a brand new leader, and he just didn't understand. And then the third one, his mom had been through a divorce and had been, I don't know if his dad was abusive or what, but he was so understanding. And he said, I will support you, whatever you want to do, whatever you feel like you need to do. And I wish I would have listened to him more. I wish I would have thought, you know what, he knows what he's doing, because there was times when I like, just, do you understand? Are you listening to me? Are you hearing me, what I'm saying? Because I've heard so many people say, I reported this, I said something, but they didn't believe it, or they don't want to see it. And I felt that way most of the time. I had to. So then you're fighting not only your spouse, but then your leaders and sometimes your family, trying to get them to understand that this is bad. He looks like this to your face, but behind closed doors, this is what it is, Anyway, we got off on a little tangent.
Well, I went through that similar thing where I was actually in a bishopric at the time when we were finally getting to the point of getting a divorce. And most of the people that I was surrounded with, I had really close relationships with, and they were supportive, but they didn't understand it because, again, you're supposed to make this work, and they don't know what the problems are, and you're not talking to them about the problems. You're just, because you're not supposed to, and you're supposed to just kind of be stoic, and especially as a man, you don't want sympathy as a man, and no one's going to give a man sympathy. The sympathy goes to the woman usually in this type of thing, but not always. But I remember I had to go to the stake president, who was a great guy, but he did not understand it. He didn't understand how bad things were and how unhealthy it was. And so his job was just kind of to iron things out and get us smooth back into the fold, back into like where things just were, looked the right way aesthetically. And I went to him. I had to do an interview with him. We did together, my ex-wife and I. And then we went to the singles. I was in a singles ward bishopric, and we went to a singles ward, the singles ward stake president, and his parents had gone through a divorce. And that was the first time any church leader at all understood where I was coming from. And he saw it exactly as it was. And his advice was, we were already getting a divorce, but it was so validating to me because you are against the system. The system is not in your favor when you're in a situation like this. And nobody understands it until you go through it. And he'd gone through it, and he'd seen what had happened with his parents. And he was like, my mom finally left my dad, and I wish she'd left him 10 years earlier. And he's like, I understand. He said this to both of us. I understand why you're separating. This is healthy for you guys. And that was, I can't express how much that meant to me and how encouraging it was to have somebody that understood it instead of just people trying to gloss over it and just kind of put things back where they're supposed to be according to the system.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't get that until years later from a couple of them. And of course, after the kidnapping, then they see.
Yeah.
But I remember one night, this was after my first divorce, my bishop called me in, and he basically, I felt like he kind of raked me over the coals for like an hour or two. And it was right in the middle of one of my daughter's birthday parties. My family was waiting for me. And I just didn't ever feel like, it didn't matter what I said, it wasn't giving him the understanding he needed. But he was the one that felt, I think, the worst. Maybe he was actually our neighbor and our bishop. But he just didn't understand. But he lived an He had a good marriage. His parents had a good marriage.
Never been exposed, never gone through it, had no
Yes.
context.
And you have to give them grace, because if they don't experience it or they're not in healthcare,
They
or,
don't know.
they don't understand.
Yeah.
You can't understand something that you've never experienced. Just like I've never experienced drug addiction. I mean, I have empathy, but I don't know. Can't understand. So then you can have grace and what I mean? Be more understanding.
I agree. I don't have any resentment, but I also see the system as being a huge problem in a lot of ways in this regard. So you're not getting any help from anybody. Nobody's seeing exactly what you're going through. You're on an island in this abusive relationship where you're threatened all the time, and you're walking on eggshells, and you're not surviving financially. And how did it escalate? Because you were getting to the point where you were going to leave him. Is that okay?
So there was one point. So we had, I had the 4 kids. I had another son, and then I got pregnant again. So I was pregnant, and
So you had a son with him, the second marriage, and then you're having a second child with him.
Yeah.
Okay.
And my parents knew what was going on. I did have my parents that were supportive, and a sister that was very supportive. And some of my other siblings, but really close was a sister and my parents. And my parents were able to get me out and get me to a crisis center. But I was 7 months pregnant with my second son. And I remember going there, and they made all these stipulations, which I understand, but also frustrates me. So they assume that if you're in this type of situation, you're probably on drugs. And if you're in this type of situation, you're probably maybe not a good mom, and just all these things that they assume. So then you go there, and I had to sign all these papers saying I wouldn't use drugs. I've never used drugs. I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, I can do that. Yeah. And then they say, well, we want you to go get a job. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I'm working out of in my home, as a seamstress, taking care of my kids. I'm like, I don't need you to get me a job making minimum wage when I can make more at home and be home with my kids. You know what I mean? Like, they put all these stipulations on, and I couldn't see myself leaving at that time. I think it's really important to understand, just because somebody helps you get out or they help you recognize doesn't mean that they're ready at that moment to leave. You know what I mean? I don't know if you had that experience where you felt like, yes, this probably isn't good, but maybe you weren't quite ready for whatever reason. They say it takes like 7 times for a woman or anybody to finally be able to leave. Like, they realize they need to leave, but they're just not ready for whatever reason. So I wasn't ready at that time. So I went back home. He promised he would be, he wouldn't hurt me anymore. He wouldn't hurt the kids anymore. And if he did start to escalate or get angry, that he would leave on his own.
So at this point, you knew he was hurting the kids.
I saw, so I would see him manipulate them and scare them. Like, he used to hold my daughter over a banister with her head down and scare the crap out of her. So I saw him doing that kind of stuff, but I didn't know about the sexual abuse, the actual physical abuse until later, because he wasn't that brazen. He would control and manipulate and scare, but he didn't, the really bad stuff I didn't find out until.
So your children are being abused physically. They're being threatened. You can see that, but the worst of the physical abuse and the sexual abuse, you weren't seeing any of that.
I didn't know about it. I mean, I think in my heart, I'm guessing I had an inkling, but because I keep looking back, like, why didn't I see that? Or why didn't I see that sign? Or, Anyway, so I go back, and it's another, say, year and a half or year with the financial problems. And of course, he didn't change at all. Yeah. He would never leave when he got mad.
They never do. Nobody changes.
No.
Not like that. They don't 180 from that type of behavior into, a good husband and a good father. That doesn't just change.
Unless they intentionally choose, but I don't feel like you can get that far gone and then all of a sudden switch. You know what I mean? It has to be, and I have to put a little plug in for my dad. My dad wasn't a perfect dad, but the thing that gave me hope about men and men changing is I watched him become a better and better and better guy, even though he didn't start out probably the best guy. And so that gave me hope. And so I put too much hope into that, realizing that, okay, you can change, but realizing, do you want to change? Is this something you want to do? You know what I mean? Or is your life just revolved around you and controlling and getting everything you want? You know what I mean? So then over the next year, financially, it didn't ever get better. It kept getting worse. And I said to my ex-husband, I'm like, somebody needs to go to school. Somebody needs to get some skills so that we can financially make it. And he didn't want me to leave the home. He didn't want, and so he chose to go to school. And it was just a very short time, maybe like 2 or 3 months. And he got really angry and said, I made him go to school. This was all his idea. This is not what he wanted to do. And so he quit. And then within a short time, I started thinking, well, I guess it's up to me. So then I started going to school up at Weber State, taking classes to go to nursing school. And it was during that first semester when I started to get my power back and some of my self-esteem back, and realizing like I really could do this on my own. I really could take care of these kids. I don't have to. I mean, this hasn't been, all the hopes and expectations of a man coming in and protecting us and taking care of us and supporting us. That didn't happen. So then I'm back to, this is what I need to do. These are my kids. I need to take responsibility. I need to get some schooling and be able to support them and not have to depend on somebody else. And so as I was getting stronger, then of course the abuse is getting worse because he's feeling that he's losing his control. He's losing his influence or whatever, his tie on me. And so after that first semester, he quit his job and said that he wanted to be a nurse too. And he wanted to go to school. I look back and I think, creepy. Yeah. This is not good. But at the time, I'm like, oh, okay. So he quits his job. I'm still sewing and taking care of all my kids and going to school. And he's just going to school. And we are together 24/7. Things have escalated. There was an experience where he pulled a gun on me and he threatened to kill himself. And at that point, I mean, here I'd had, say, 5.5 years or almost 6 years of threats and scared all the time. And I don't know. I don't think our bodies and spirit can take that, where you're scared all the time. And you think at any moment something bad can happen, You just can't keep doing that. So I just remember not caring anymore. I don't care. I don't care if you hurt me. I don't care if you kill me. I'm just tired of being scared. So then when he pulled the gun on me, I said, pulled a gun on himself, said, I'm going to kill myself. And I said, go ahead and kill yourself. That was all my problem.
It's all a favor.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't say that solved the problem, but that's how I felt.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah. And then because ultimately I didn't think he would ever leave. And I didn't think I'd ever get a divorce. And if I did, then what would happen with the kids? Would he try to take my kids away? Just for the control measure of it and making our lives miserable. Anyway, so he turned around and said, well, how about I shoot you? And then I was like, holy crap, this is real.
He says he's going to shoot himself. Then he says he's going to shoot you. And when you were at this point, this breaking point where you just didn't want to be scared anymore.
Yeah, I was at the point I didn't care, which looking back, I think, okay, that's a really scary place to be when you don't care anymore because usually you do anything to survive. So you'll lie, you pretend things, but I was past that point and I just didn't care anymore. And then there was another incident within that week where I went to, I don't know if I was going to call the cops or what. And in the past, there was many incidences where, like one time I tried to jump out the window, our second story window, to try to get away from him. One time
were you pregnant at the time?
Yes,
I remember you telling me that. It's just insane to me. People don't know what's going on.
So crazy to me that none of my neighbors saw.
Yeah.
I mean, and we lived in where your house is right, like your neighborhood. Yeah. Houses right next to each other.
Yeah.
You would think they'd know everything.
Yep.
Yeah. One time I ran around, almost got to the van. one time I was in the van and he almost pulled the door off.
Gosh, it sounds like a nightmare. Like one of my, you're trying to get away, and it's like a horror movie.
It is.
Yeah.
And it keeps repeating. And then you're like going back in. You're like, okay, he caught me. Go back into your little cell.
Back into hell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, so then there was another incident where he choked me, where I almost passed out. And then within that week, we ended up, actually, my sister had a baby that had passed away. We were going to the funeral, and my dad saw both of us, and he says, "You guys look like shit.
Mhm.
You like look so bad because of all this stuff we were going through." And then there was one night that that he wanted to go take a test for school, but I couldn't because I was in the middle of kids and sewing and whatever. And he got really mad, and because he wanted me to stop and go do whatever he wanted me to do. Like he was a child.
Yeah.
Actually, more
He
worse.
had no autonomy. He was controlling everything.
Yeah. But he actually left, and we hadn't been apart. I don't know if it was a month or 2 months that we literally had not physically been apart. And I remember, because of all the abuse that had escalated immediately, and I don't remember thinking like, I need to get out of here. I don't remember ever planning it like consciously, but subconsciously my body and my mind must have thought, okay, as soon as we see a clearing, we're out of here. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so when he left, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, we're alone. I grabbed my kids, put them in the car, drove to my parents' house, and started telling them everything that had happened, the gun incident, the choking incident. And my kids were in the living room. I was in the back bedroom with my dad talking to him, and he was just helping me. And my ex-husband pulled up to the front. Like, he knew exactly where we were, what we were doing. I don't know how they have that uncanny where they know everything. And he called into my parents' house, and my sister picked up the phone and asked to talk to me. And she says, well, she's not available. And I must have just come out of the bedroom. He must have been looking through the window. And he says, well, I can see exactly what she's doing.
Jeez, man, this is a horror movie.
Oh. And so my sister was scared, and my parents were scared. And he came in the door, and he came and got the kids and left. And then I just started crying to my dad. I'm like, I'll never be able to leave. Never be able to be safe. He'll never let me go. And so I went home, and this is a good thing. He had called our bishop and somebody else, and they'd come over, and they actually talked to him, and they convinced him to leave and go spend time with his mom and just take a break. And I know they didn't intentionally mean like that it's going to be a divorce, but they realized that it was bad enough that I needed him to leave. And so he actually got up the next morning, packed his bag, and he left, which was a miracle, a total miracle. And then from that point, like, things got crazy. Within a day or two, my brother, who had been an MP, he kept me up till like 2 or 3 in the morning, convincing me to go get a protective order, which at that point I was so scared to get, because his first wife had got a protective order, and he was so angry and just wanted to do her harm, you know what I mean? So I thought, well, I don't want him to get that angry, and I don't want him to. So it took a long time to convince me to go get the protective order. So I went and got the protective order. It took him a little bit to serve it. And then when they served it, he just went off the deep end. He threatened suicide, ended up in the hospital. People, of course, people are calling me, telling me all the crazy stuff that he's doing and what he's saying. There was one night he came to the church and scared the crap out of one of my daughters. Just lots of just him going off the deep end because he'd lost control and things weren't going the way he wanted. And I was just thinking, okay, I've got the protective order now. Now what am I going to do? And my parents, thank goodness, had a place in their house. So I thought, okay, I'm just gonna move in with my parents, finish school, really buckle down, finish school, and then I'll be able to, get a home of my own and move out and everything. And so just making plans of moving forward, not thinking and actually being so grateful that I was out of it. And I remember taking a shower one night and looking down at my body and thinking, he never gets to touch me again. He never gets to touch me again. I never have to deal with his stuff again. And then I think it was 2 or 3 weeks after we had separated, I had moved in with my parents. I feel like things were just really moving along. He had planned this elaborate scheme to kidnap me. And of course, he knew the class that I was going to and up at college, and he knew my schedule. And so there was one point he actually, I want to tell this part just because I think it's really important. There was one night so we had mutual friends, of course, and he was keeping tabs on me from the mutual friends, which is interesting. People don't understand what a protective order is, meaning you're not supposed, once I have a protective order, then it's not his right to know anything about me. But people don't understand that. And he was so good at getting information out of people. So then he found out one evening that I was up there by myself taking a test. And he got me to, sit in the van with him and talk to him and everything. And scared to death. Like I remember shaking like a leaf. And I remember him looking at me, surprised that I was scared. And I called the cops and they came and arrested him for violation of the protective order. And then within a short time, I think it was like 30 or 40 minutes, the cops called me and said, oh, by the way, his mom came and bailed him out and he's back on the streets again. And I thought, at that point, I'm never going to be free of him because his mom just bails him out every time and he has no consequences and he can get away with anything. And I really did believe that. I felt like he was like larger than life. He could do anything he wanted. And I had no rights and he was going to take him away like he had for the past 6 years, So then within another week or week and a half, I was up at college again. I remember coming up the hill, parking in this it was just this little parking lot that was kind of out of the way. And there was a van parked next to my van and the door was a little bit ajar. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. And I was digging in my backpack to get my keys. And all of a sudden somebody comes up behind me, shoves me into this van. And I look up. First, I realize it's my ex-husband. And then I look up and see this kid that's in the driver's seat. And I looked at him and I said, you don't want to do this.
Yeah, you'd ever seen this kid before?
You know what? After it was all over, I realized I'd seen him once. It was his cousin's son. But I didn't recognize him because when he was a kid then, and now he was almost 16. So I looked at the kid and I said, you don't want to do this, and that made my ex-husband really angry. And he just punched me really, really hard in the face, broke my nose, my head, when you get punched in the face, your head explodes and start bleeding everywhere. And then just one thing after the next, then he stripped me down and he raped me. And then he tied me up.
In the back of the van while this kid is driving?
But the kids, and it's right behind that front seat. So it's not like there's any privacy. I'm like, he's watching the whole thing or aware of the whole thing anyway. And my ex-husband, so he does that, ties me up. And then he keeps saying to that kid, go where we have planned. Then he grabbed my purse and he took some of my credit cards and stuff. And I think he decided that he was going to try to go get money out of my account. And so he had him stop at the credit union. And at this point,
This is Weber State Credit Union?
It's actually America First.
Okay. But he kidnapped you from Weber State.
He did.
From Weber State, yeah.
Yeah. And he's driving down through Kaysville. I mean, I don't know because my eyes are taped shut, but after it was all done.
But at the bank, so he goes to get some money.
He goes to get the money, and I'm able to get loose because he's tied me up with duct tape. And I start running around the van, realizing there's no handles. And it's one of
So you're
those,
inside. You can't get out.
I can't get out. And the windows only open like this much. And even the handle to the front of the van, you can't get out. So then I realized the only way I can get out is that kid. That kid has got to help me. So I start pleading with him, please, please. I have 6 kids, please, please let me, please help me. And he will not. He will not. And I looked in his eyes. His eyes were so dead. So dead. It's like he wasn't there, or it was the craziest thing to see a kid so young, you know? And he gave me some excuse like, you know, I can't, or it was, a lame excuse. I even remember holding his face in my hand and really looking in his eyes. And here I am bleeding here. I'm half naked or almost all naked, bleeding down here too. And I think, you won't help me? Have you no compassion? You don't even know me. Why are you doing this? No, he won't help me. And then we both look up, both get scared. And here comes my ex-husband walking out the door. So I remember I run all the way to the back of the van, sit in the seat, and he comes out and he starts yelling at that kid, and then he's yelling at me, and he, tapes me back up again. And then we start driving to where they had planned. Takes me to this hotel, or this little old motel. It was actually in Kaysville, one of those little strip motels. And he drives up, tells the kid to go rent a room, and, comes back. And this whole time, the whole time we're driving, he's telling me he's going to kill me. He's going to put me in my wedding dress and put me in the river. My family's never going to find me. Just one thing after the next, just threats. And I don't know if he was deciding the whole time, like, what do I want to do? How is this going to play out? Obviously, he wanted to kidnap me and get me back. But then maybe, I don't know if he planned to kill me the whole time or what. But we get to the motel and he grabs me out. My feet aren't tied, but I still can't see, and my hands are tied, and he just keeps pushing me. I remember hitting into a pole and then pushing me through the doorway, pushing me onto the bed. Then he ties me up to the bed, spread eagle on the bed, rapes me again. And then I hear him, in the bathroom, whatever he's doing.
Is the kid still there?
He told the kid to leave and go to back to school, actually.
He's just going to go back to school like another day.
Yeah, no big deal.
Back to chemistry.
Yeah. And imagine, it took a long time to forgive that kid, but I have to have empathy for that kid.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that in just a moment. So the kid is gone. You're in this motel room and you're spread eagle tied to the bed.
Mm-hmm.
And he taped up your face.
Taped up my face, yeah. And I wanted to say, the whole time I'm in the van, I'm praying that kid will help me.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't help me at the bank. And then I prayed that he would tell, when he goes in to get to the room, I'm like, please tell somebody what's going on. Please tell somebody, I'm praying and praying, and realizing that prayer was never going to get answered. Like the most despairing, hopeless feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But interesting to me, here I am. So obviously I was saved, but interesting that we get so focused on it has to look this way. You know what I mean? God, I want you to save me, and I want you to save me this way, like through this kid.
But that's the only resource you have in your mind.
That's
the only option at this point, because nobody knows you're in the van except the kid.
Yeah. And I think that's my, Yep. So then I'm spread eagle on the bed, and then he decides, my ex-husband keeps going back and forth. Should I kill you, or should I kill myself, or should I kill you and then myself? And he's just, debating back and forth. And then he starts pacing. They're coming. They're coming. I don't know how he knew that they were coming. And then he decides to kill me. And so he tapes up my entire face with duct tape. And I had a little hole here by my eye. And I remember if I would just breathe really shallow, I could get like a little bit of air. And so I'd be like trying to calm myself down. And then it would suck back up against my face. And that just kept happening. And then I started begging God. I'm like, just let me die. I can't do this. Scariest, absolute scariest feeling is to not be able to breathe, you know? Um, and then I went to another place, like, and it was bright and there was a lot of people there. And then within a short time, I felt the tape being ripped off of my face. And I don't remember taking a big deep breath in or that I was short of breath. I just remember I was just breathing normal. And then I started hearing all these people coming through the door. And the police had been called and they were there. And they, from there, it became a crime scene. I mean, I remember them cutting me from the bed, but they just left me there. And I'm sure it's because I wasn't in mortal, wasn't emergent danger. And then I remember realizing I was supposed to pick up my kids. It was a short day at school. I was supposed to pick up my kids. And I remember just saying over and over, where are my kids? Are my kids okay? Where are my kids? As soon as I was, could breathe. And the policeman from the town I had lived in had heard, the radio, the police radio, and realized that it was me that had gotten kidnapped. And so he called my mom, and my mom had went and picked up the kids. So they called around, found out the kids were okay, and told me. And then I could start trying to process what had just happened. I remember looking over, and there was a massager on the chair. There was just things that I'm like, what was he thinking? Was he thinking we're going to have
So is he still there? Or the cops have him? He was there when
No.
the cops got there.
He was there, but of course he was the first one that left.
They took him though. They came in and he's there. So they knocked down the door.
Yeah.
And there was somebody that had seen, this is how they knew, right? How did they know that you were?
So there was a gal that had seen me get pushed in the van at Weber State.
Okay.
And she didn't have a cell phone. She had walked all the way back down the hill to the library and gone in and remembered the whole license plate, which they said nobody ever remembers the whole license plate. And then
It's like an angel, man. This is,
Mm-hmm. So then she calls the cops. The cops call the people who own the van. So the van was the kids' parents.
Okay.
So he tried to cover his tracks by not using his own vehicle. They called the kids' parents, and then they sent a policeman there. So they didn't know if it was a joke. She didn't know if it was a joke. I guess crazy stuff happens on colleges. And so the policeman walked up to the door and said, yes, my son has the van with his, I don't know, what would you call it, cousin? Second cousin. Yeah.
Because I don't know how that works. Yeah.
Yeah. And
so they knew he was with him.
Yeah.
He'd been with him in the van.
They had said, he told them that they were going to go move something, and that's why they needed the van.
And so now they know that your husband at the time has you. They know that now. They made that connection.
Yeah. And the reason they did is because of that the last time I'd called and he'd been arrested. So then it was in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Then they could start putting things together. So I just look at all the steps that had to happen. So the policemen, I talked to them years later that had gone up to the door. They went up to the door, asked.
How did they find the van? Did somebody see it in the motel parking lot? How did they know that you were in a
So
motel?
the kid, instead of going back to school, he went home.
So he was there.
But if the policeman had not waited, so it's funny, they said, we walked up to the door. She didn't really have any answers, didn't know where he was. And so they were just going to leave. They were doing like a checkup just to see, where it was and whose it was. But the policeman said, I felt like we should stay there and wait. And so they waited until he came with the van. The kid came with the van. And so they were there when he drove up. And he immediately went in the house. He wouldn't talk to the police. He wouldn't tell them where I was at, but he did tell his mom. And then his mom told the cops, and then they called and had somebody else come blaring in. And they said it was crazy. We went right to the door. Like we drove right to the door where you were at. So all of these things were in place. I feel like that God was saving me. And I really believe that we have our agency to do what we want. So my ex-husband got to choose to kidnap me, which is really hard for me to take because I think, well, what about my choice? I didn't choose that. But he got to choose to kidnap me, but he didn't get to choose to kill me because it wasn't my time yet. So then God came in and all these steps to save me. so I could take care of my kids, raise my kids, you know what I mean? But I truly believe he will be held accountable for killing me because that was his intent. And that's what he almost succeeded in doing, you know?
So you're in the room. They take the tape off your face. You're laying there. He's gone. You're starting to process everything. The kids are okay. That's the first thought. And then what's happening after that?
I just looked around the room. I still don't know answers to these, but I mean, he had stuff that looked like he wanted to have a romantic weekend on the chair. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which I can't wrap my head around how you'd have a romantic evening with somebody who you're trying to kill or you just kidnapped and raped, you know? Just, I've had lots of people ask me, especially people that are in healthcare, mental health care, like, why did he do it? Why did he do it? I have no idea why he did it or what his motive was, except for he really wanted to control me. And when he couldn't, he took matters into his own hand, I guess. I don't think you can analyze a psychopath brain and how they work. But anyway, so they kept me there for a while, took all the evidence they needed. I don't know what everything the policemen do. And then they finally brought me up to the hospital. And that policeman I told you that called my mom, he was at the door. And I remember seeing him, that face that I knew. Not that all the other policemen weren't really nice, because they were. But I just remember started crying, like, it's somebody I know. I feel safe now. I got brought into the room. They start hammering me with questions, trying to get my statement, and then they'll leave for a little bit. And then, the medical people came in and did all, made sure I was okay physically. And then they let me come out. My parents were outside waiting. And I remember coming out, and my dad, he looked at me, with my face all beat up and everything. And he just fell back against the wall and started bawling. And I just felt so bad. Anyway. And then I go out and I start telling them everything. I start telling him what happened and all the stories. And as soon as I started talking to them, the police came back and grabbed me and put me back in the room. They didn't want me sharing stuff, with my family before I shared it with them. Then they took the rest of my statement, and then I was able to go home. And from there, it was a hard go, trying to.
Rob told me your brother is one of my really, really good friends. And he told me that I think it was that night he came back and he saw you. And he described you being in this nightgown and just seeing you as this broken. He just saw this little girl. He didn't see his older sister. He saw this little girl that was completely traumatized. It was like the little girl had come out somehow to try to cope.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how I felt for probably at least 6 months,
He also described, he was saying that you guys were driving one time, maybe it was a few months later, and that he was in the car with you. I don't remember where you were going, if he told me that or not, but that on the way home, you just broke down and completely. He said that's where he thought you were finally like realizing all of the horror of it, like settled in on you. This was like months later or weeks later, you and him in the car, and he didn't know what to do. And you just were screaming and yelling and crying and bawling, and he had to carry you into the house because you were completely wrecked at this time. And it was like that all of the evil and the horror and everything that you'd gone through was finally coming out.
It's interesting when you go through trauma like that. I don't think, even though I had kept telling the story, like I had told the story to the police in the hospital, then I had to go again and tell them again. I had to write it down. My mom typed it out. We had to write it out. And then I went and told them again. So I told this story, but it was as if I was telling it from a third person. Like, this happened, then this happened, and my brain didn't process it. You know what I mean? And then that experience with Rob and several other times when my brain was accepting one part of it, like the part of the rape or the part of that he tried to kill me. I'm the mother of his children and he's trying to kill me. You know what I mean? Just every part of it. It took a different time when my brain and my I guess my spirit were ready to accept it. And then I would freak out as if it was happening right then. But I think that's how we accept trauma. We can't accept it all at once. It's too much.
Yeah. Stages. Yeah. He says, too, he described this time when you went back to court. I don't remember the dates. You can tell me. But when you had to go face him, your ex-husband at this point, he's having the hearing and you're going there to testify. And he said you were a completely different person at that point. Like you were empowered. And so this process took some time, but that you were able to go there and stare him in the face and say what you needed to say. He just described you as just being this powerful woman that could stand there in front of this evil and stand in front of this person who had done this to you and be courageous enough to just say what you needed to say.
That was like 3. So it took a year to go through the court process. And actually on our anniversary, interesting, is when he got sentenced. I remember up till that time, I kept listening to Martina McBride, Independence Day. I'm like, I'm going to get my Independence Day. I'm going to.
On the anniversary. It's like God has a sense of humor, sort of, in this kind of a dark sense of humor.
Which was hilarious because I didn't plan any of the dates. You know how court is. They just randomly choose dates.
You didn't pick it. God picked it. It seems like the universe. Karma.
Yeah, and interesting. It took.
It's like happy anniversary, motherfucker.
Exactly.
You're going to prison for the rest of your life.
It was Valentine's Day. Yeah. Interesting.
Jeez. The universe has a sense of humor, a morbid sense of humor sometimes. But.
Yeah. So I wanted to share this part because people always say, well, what happened? What happened to him? What was his sentence? So he actually wrote a letter out of jail to another Becky saying that he was going to finish the job when he got out. And of course, they confiscated the letter. And that was we always say, everybody wrote a letter, and we all did. My parents, me, my siblings, and my kids all wrote letters on what we thought his sentence should be. But his letter was the most effective.
Oh, yeah, he damned himself.
Yeah.
You were telling me about how you went to a counselor, and the counselor asked you've come out of this. This is many years ago, and now we'll get to this in a second about where you've gone with your life since then, but that you had a counselor, and the counselor asked you, how long did he hurt you? And how much longer are you going to let him hurt you?
Yeah, she said, how many years have you given him? And at that point, it was 6. How many more years are you going to give him? And I thought, not one more.
How were you able to do that? How were you able to cut those cables?
To me, it's a process of forgiving, because if you're holding on to those feelings, then you still have that attachment. And so not meaning that it wasn't instant, but then it was a decision. And, once you make a decision, it's not very much longer after that things happen. And so I wouldn't say it was an immediate forgiveness, but it was like, okay, I'm going to do everything I can that you're no longer part of my life. Like forgive you, let go of you, not allow you, not think about you, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like you don't have any more influence on my life.
I think this is so profound because people get forgiveness wrong all the time. They think forgiveness means somehow condoning behavior, and forgiveness isn't about condoning behavior. Forgiveness is about cutting your emotional ties to that situation, cutting that thing away from you so it's not an anchor to your soul anymore and you can move on. It's not about saying it's okay, and it's not about saying there shouldn't be consequences and severe consequences for bad behavior, but it's about saying I'm no longer going to be held to hate and resentment and victimhood anymore. I'm no longer going to allow those emotions, that poison in my soul. I'm going to let that go. That's what forgiveness means to me.
It's like a gift to yourself.
Exactly.
It's a gift to
That's
yourself.
the best way to say it. That's profound. Forgiveness is a gift to yourself.
Yeah, because there's probably people you're holding feelings against that don't even know you are. Mm-hmm. It's not affecting them. So forgiveness really this is about me, and I don't choose to have this part of me anymore. Because I feel like we only have so much room in our spirit and our body to hold emotions. Are you going to allow them to be good emotions or bad emotions? Are you going to, have anger and angst and frustration, is that going to be part of you, or do you want it to be love and joy and happiness and peace? You get to choose, and there's only so much of it that can, be part of you.
Speaking of forgiveness, Rob told me, and he gave me permission to say this, but he and one of your brothers had a buddy getting out of prison, and they were talking to him about getting your ex-husband taken care of in prison. It was going to cost a certain amount of money that they were going to pay, and they were going to take care of it. And you know this?
Mm-mm.
Did you know this story? Yeah, so they were going down that road, and I guess your other brother kind of called it off at the last minute. He's going to be in prison forever. But it makes me think of the movie Man on Fire. It's a Denzel Washington movie, and at one point he's exacting revenge for the kidnapping of a girl that was on his watch, a little girl that he was supposed to be the bodyguard for. And this Spanish couple says, in church, we learn to forgive. And Denzel Washington says, forgiveness is between them and God. It's my job to arrange the meeting. And I feel like this is where real healthy masculinity comes in. It's men that are willing to put on an orange jumpsuit if necessary to protect those on their watch, to take out those who would hurt others. It's something I think we've lost in society in a lot of ways, that we don't have that kind of grit anymore. We don't have that kind of consequence anymore, that in a way, vigilante justice. And people argue with me all the time about this, but I know that if something like this happened on my watch, that things would be taken. I would be taking things into my own hands. If something happened to my sister, or God forbid something ever happened to my wife or my children or anybody that was on my watch, it would be a different set of circumstances.
It would be taken.
Yeah. And forgiveness could be sorted out on the other side. Yeah. It's just wouldn't be something that person would continue to be walking around as a threat to anybody.
And if he wasn't in prison, I would totally beg my brothers for that, actually.
I don't think you'd have to beg him for that. I think there'd be a lot of people at this point that would make sure that guy never, ever had a chance to hurt you or anybody else again. I believe there needs to be more of that in society. So you had one bad marriage and one horror show, a horror movie, a real life horror movie for your second marriage. You're married a third time now. Third time's a charm.
For me, it is.
Third time's a charm for you. And you're in a really good relationship. How did you ever get to the point where you could trust men again? Or trust even yourself to be able to pick a good man again?
Didn't ever trust myself, honestly.
How did that work? How did you guys make that happen?
So I wanted to share the story up to that point. So first of all, I took probably 3 or 4 years doing intense things to heal and forgive and move on and get stronger and feel better about myself. And then there was a point when I felt like God was saying, would you like to be a mom to more kids? My soft heart. Like, yes, I will be. I would like to have more children. But
at this point, you have 6.
I have 6, yeah. I says, but you better send me a good guy, because I'm not doing that crap again. And I don't want to bring more in by myself.
How many years after is this?
It's a good 3 to 4 years, because I was single 6 years before I got married again. Okay. So it's a good 3 to 4. Because at that point, I was like, I was happy being single. Yeah. I was going to raise my family and then go travel or whatever. I was planning a good life. And then when I felt like that I was supposed to have more kids, then I start, and here I am getting on later 30s. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, okay, if I want to have more kids, we kind of got to move this along, you know? So my sister actually moved to Arizona and met my current husband and connected us. And so there's no way. Like I got online one time and ran into another very controlling guy. He got mad at me because I didn't want to meet him. Mm. So I immediately got off online.
You can pick up those red flags and once you've lived through that, you see those red flags really fast. And
it scared me. Yeah. I'm like, they put on this show. You know how they put on their...
Uh-huh. But you can see it now because you know it. Like you've lived it. I can attest to that. Like I knew that when I came out into the dating world, I knew what red flags to look for, what I was, no matter how well it was trying to be concealed or covered up. I just knew. Like you could just sense it.
Well, and the crazy part is they can only hide it for so long. Mm-hmm. So in that point, dating long is a good thing.
Yeah.
So yeah. So my sister introduced us, and.
But was it like how did you trust him?
That I had it was a choice, and I just remember all these different choices, actually, looking at my brothers and my dad and realizing, hey, there's still good men in the world. You know, there's still bad men, but there's still good men, and choosing to find the good men and recognizing the bad guys and not spending time with them, or you know what I mean,
Mhm.
not interacting with them. But actually, for years, I didn't really interact with men at all, except for my family.
Mm.
And then, of course, I was a hospice nurse, so I interacted with my patients' family and stuff, but they were always sweet and kind, you know what I mean? Except for a couple. But I was in a professional thing, and so I had backup if I needed it. So it was just a choice to look at men and say, okay, yeah, there's good guys and there's bad guys, and I don't want to be a man hater. Because I ran into a lot of women like that. And I thought, okay, you're choosing. And I have four boys at this time. I have
Mhm.
4 boys. Am I going to choose to not like men
Mhm.
when I have all these men in my life? No, that's half of my loved ones. I wouldn't want to do that. And plus, if you choose to hate them and not love them and find good in them, then you're being filled with hate. You know what I mean? And I really intentionally try to be filled with love and joy and happiness, whether it's forgiving or choosing to not be angry, or you know what I mean? I that's very sacred space to me.
I don't I've been around you a few times now, Becky, and you radiate light. You're doing it right now, and it's not just the lights in this room. Like, you give off such a positive aura. Your energy, you can pick up energy off of people, and it's always just this brilliant, beautiful energy that comes through in your countenance. It comes through in who you are. This is just such an important lesson in life. You've had maybe the worst that life can throw at somebody and survive it. You know, you've gone through the darkest darkness that's there in this that this world can throw at you. And yet now here you are just radiating light and doing so much good in the world. And you had a wonderful relationship. You have 3 more kids from this other relationship. So you have 9 children that you are raising, that you're the mother to. Life is a choice. You can't choose what happens to you always, right? You can't control what somebody else's choices are going to be, but you can choose how you process it. And it's that analogy: the same water that hardens an egg is the same water that softens a potato. Everybody goes through hard times. Everybody goes through most people are not going to go through anything even close to what you went through, but everybody goes through their own Garden of Gethsemane, their own refiner's fire. It's part of the curriculum of this life. How you choose to internalize that, or how you choose to process that, determines everything, because a lot of other people in your place would have chose a different path. They would have held on to resentment. They would have held on to fear. They would have harbored this negative energy in them, and it would have something that would have broken them. It would have hardened them to the world, but you've opened yourself up in a way that now you share this radiance with everybody around you. And I just think you're just a walking example of this, a walking metaphor of what people can do in this life. And if you're willing to open yourself up to the world instead of close off, even when there's pain and there's future pain and there's risk when you're open and you're vulnerable. But what's the alternative? To build a wall, to like close off to the world.
And not have the full joy and light and happiness. I mean, if I had chosen that, because I've met a lot of people that have been through maybe not as bad as me, but maybe they chose alcohol and they go get drunk every night
Mm.
and they try to wash away their troubles, and not judging them at all because that's what they've chosen. But there's honestly, I feel like if you turn to God, He can make anything bad into something good. Like the good of me getting kidnapped was my kids never, ever, ever have to go see him. He doesn't get to manipulate them. He doesn't get to hurt them. They never had to go back to that. And so I sacrificed, and it was worth it. Was worth it. That's the silver lining. You know what I mean? So if you can find a silver lining or find a purpose for something hard that happened in your life, even if it's just your growth, like I became a better person, I became stronger, there's always something good from something bad. There always is. But you have to choose
to look at that and find it and run with it. You know what I mean? And I have 9 kids and a husband, and I have 9 brothers and sisters and a mom and dad. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer or a victim or feel sorry for me. I want to be a strength and a help to people. You know what I mean?
One of the big undercurrent in this story that you shared from start to finish was this connection with God and all of this, that he was a part of the process. A lot of people, especially when they go through hard times or when they see other people go through hard times, they'll dismiss it and say God doesn't exist because he lets bad things happen to good people. But what they miss is that when people go through hard times, if they will turn to God, this is the magic of God. This is the magic of what Christ does for us, is that his power, his redemptive force is strong enough to make the worst things that happen into our lives become catalysts for the best things that happen in our lives. But they miss that part, and they miss the part that suffering is a universal teacher for so many lessons that we get out of this life. Without suffering, life would be meaningless. Without going through hard times, life would be meaningless. And the tragedies when people get lost in the suffering, they don't come out of it. They don't turn to God. They turn to drugs. They turn to resentment. They turn to other sources to try and get through it, and they get lost in that. And that's the real tragedy. But the tragedy is not the suffering in and of itself. Because if you will turn to that higher way, the higher self, if you'll turn to the light, if you'll turn to God, all of these things that happen to us in this life, even the things that are the worst, can be turned into the very best things. They can become the catalyst for redemption and growth. It's the whole hero's journey. We descend into the darkness in this life. All of us go into various places of darkness in this life. But if we'll keep that North Star, we'll come out of the darkness more vibrant, more brilliant, more beautiful than we went into that darkness. And you're just a walking example of that.
Thank you.
Becky, thank you for being here today. You drove up here to come be on the show. You hit a calf and ruined your minivan. Life's not easy. It's still got its curveballs. There's never going to be easy. We got to go through this whole life thing, this whole curriculum. But you're here, and you just brought so much. You brought so much positive energy into my life, into all of us here. And so I just want to thank you. Where can people find you?
So I have a website, BeckyErkkila.com, and I've got my book on there, and I've actually got a program.
This book right here, as we mentioned at the beginning, which I'd highly recommend people read. Order it. They can find this on Amazon.
They can find it on Amazon, yep. And it talks about my experience, but also it's more of a workbook to try to help people really analyze their relationships and their life, help them forgive, find the joy in life, even though you experience hard things. So, and then I have a program. I really want to help people that are in domestic violence. And I think sometimes it's hard to get to the victim, but the family members and the loved ones that maybe don't understand why they're staying or what makes them not leave, I have a program to try to help those loved ones. It's only $30, and I feel like it opens your eyes and helps you not step out, because I think a lot of time the perpetrator wants everyone to step away and allow him full control over the victim. And if loved ones do that, then they don't have that safe net when they need it, when they're ready to leave. And there is a lot of dynamics, about why you don't leave and what makes you stay. And so if you can just love them and be patient.
So they can find you on social media?
Yeah. Becky Erkkila.
ERKKILA.
On Instagram and Facebook. So.
And order her program, especially if you have anybody that's going through hard times, that's gone through really rough patches. You're a source of light in this world that does have so much darkness in it. But you are showing all of us what is possible, what is capable, how we can turn the bad into good when we orient ourselves in the correct way.
There's hope. There is hope in everything.
Thank you, Becky.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you came.